Hello and welcome to a new season, a new episode of the Healthy Mind Chat with me, Hassan Ali Khan. I am so happy to be back recording after a while and interviewing guests, expert guests on topics which are close to my heart related to health, healthcare, and health communication. And without further ado, I really want to go into our topic for today, which is going to be it's the question that I want to get an answer to, hopefully, which is how does trauma and events that happen in our past impact how we form relationships, do relating, and and be intimate with someone. Um, and let me actually kind of share why this question came about in my life at a personal level. A few years ago, I was engaged to get married. Sadly, it didn't work out. And I was emotional, grief stricken. And in order to really understand why I was doing the things that I was doing, feeling the things that I was feeling, I tried to intellectualize my grief. I went to a local bookshop, found a book, and the book was called Loving Bravely by Alexandra Solomon. She happens to be a family therapist who works out of Chicago. Um, and in it, I found, amongst many wonderful and great things that I learned from the book, I found this piece of information which very interesting. And that was that how we love, how we hate, how we form relationships, how we relate to one another, and more related to what we're speaking about today, how do we form romantic relationships and become intimate with someone? All of that is based on our experiences as a child and the environment that we grew up in, and who we saw, mainly our parents or our guardians, how they related to one another and those around them. Later on, now that I'm studying substance use counseling, and I got introduced to the basics of psychology formally, and and also human development, and then I got introduced to Piaget, Erickson, as well as I think it's Vygotsky. All of them, from their work, I think modern ideas of human development is kind of formed from their ideas that the environment and the experiences as children really shape how we then form relationships. And I think, which is very intriguing, very interesting, because now that I'm on this journey and trying to find a life partner, I've come across many individuals and many different stories. And sadly, some of the realities of the stories are that yes, there's something that you can identify, almost something that happened in their past that is now starting to manifest as they're trying to form their relationship or they're trying to relate. And as in, some of the issues that I've come across is individuals having problems with commitment, individuals feeling extremely insecure, being afraid about getting into a relationship, and this idea of self-defeat. Although I've also come across some very wonderful experiences where those who had wonderful childhood experience, that the way they looked at relationships and how they formed relationships was totally different. So that just got me thinking. It got me really intrigued, and but more so, as a maybe from a clinical side, I was more drawn towards and trying to understand the idea of trauma. And I really want to use the word trauma very carefully, because in the clinical world, there may be a slightly more technical definition versus how we may use it in our everyday setting, as often happens when technical language comes into uh, everyday use. Um, and as far as I understand, what I learned is that trauma has a relationship with this idea that one's life or physical health is being impacted by whatever event, and that element of one's life or losing one's life is a key component to that. But I think in everyday language that may not necessarily be the case, and we may use the word trauma in much more loosely. With that said, I am really excited to bring on my guest today, who would unpack all of this for us and more, hopefully. Uh, One reason I'm also excited is because he happens to be my mentor. I know him for a while. His name is Adam Mussa. He will correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think he was born in the Middle East. He's Egyptian by background, but he grew up in Scotland, so you will hear that Scotch or Scottish accent. But now he lives in Birmingham, UK. He started off as at university as an engineering student, but life and path took him elsewhere where he was intrigued by the human mind and I guess why people do the things that they do. And it took him to a very interesting track. And I actually want him to explain what that pathway is, which now eventually has led him towards working with individuals who've had traumatic experiences in the past and are now finding trouble or issues with forming intimate relationships today. And he has a service which he will then talk about. I think it's called Tranquility after, or intimacy after trauma.
Tranquilandcherished.com.
And tranquilandcherished.com. That's the one, because I think he's got different iterations. But that tranquilandcherished.com is the service that he has, and it's from the little that I've seen of it and experienced of it, it's absolutely amazing. And I really want him to kind of share how he deals with people with trauma, the therapeutic tools that he uses in helping individuals. So I'm really excited for you to listen to this interview, and hopefully after that we'll have a quick reflection on what was said. Welcome, Adam. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm well. Excited to be here, and it's something that I've been looking forward to ever since you extended the invitation.
Oh, brilliant! I'm glad to hear, and it's been a while since we've met or seen each other, and hopefully we'll be in each other's presence soon. I know you're a very, very, very busy person. I don't want to take a lot of your time here, and I want to straight get into the topic. So Adam, can you explain to us how is it that an engineering student found himself studying the human mind and got himself into therapy world?
Okay. So it's a multifaceted answer. Lots of factors and variables come into it. But in essence, ever since I was maybe 8 or 9, I would always wonder why people do what they do. And I would ask my father, where can I learn about this? My father dissuaded me from learning about psychology. What he knew about psychology was Freud and other similar, in his opinion, twisted, and there is a lot of twisted elements to a lot of what Freud taught, but there's also a lot of benefit. So I did stay away, but it was definitely a question that I kept asking myself. I didn't know what to study in university, but my father was an engineer. He was doing artificial intelligence all the way back, back then, before the 90s. And so I decided that I would just do electronic and software engineering. I was good at maths, I was good at sciences. It wasn't a passion. And then 2 years into that, I stumbled across accelerated learning, hypnotherapy, NLP, cognitive sciences, and I was just blown away. So I negotiated to take a year off of studying, and push and pull, it happened. Being of Egyptian descent, one must have a degree, if not a master's, and then a PhD on top of that. So taking that year out was a big deal, and I just never went back. Is the reality? It sounds like it's the opposite spectrum, but we live, and this is what I mean by multifaceted. We live in an age right now where software and engineering is used as a metaphor to describe the mind. So we say, change your programming, change your, rewire your brain, etc. Metaphors that are used. Not that I don't agree with them much anymore, but they're definitely there. They're used, and so bridging that gap between the non-conscious hardware and between the mind and that human consciousness wasn't too much of a big leap because of the metaphors that were being used and programming, people's programming, etc. There were lots of metaphors that were being used, so it was a nice little jump. That was back in the year 2000.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, I've studied different modalities, not just to do with cognitive psychology, not just to do with hypnotherapy or NLP, but also to do with other semantic modalities, as well somatic modalities to do with how the brain and the body interact with each other, and how the brain maps onto the body and etc. As well as I've studied energy, the use of energy for healing, how emotions affect energy, how energy affects emotions, as much as possible. Wherever there's anything to do with how human beings work,
Mm-hmm.
I'm very interested in that, including martial arts, including any endeavor that has a bit of exoticness, maybe, but also something to do with very high functioning excellence of human beings. I'm just intrigued.
Well, brilliant. And there's a few things that you said there, and you've introduced, I guess, the modalities element and different, I think, paths in how we may approach the human mind. You mentioned
Sure.
hypnotherapy, semantic therapies. Um, for the layperson, would you be able to kind of give us a deep understanding of what those are and why you believe those modalities are effective versus and clearly you've had a very alternative way of studying
Yeah.
this, because the traditional way is go to a bachelor's, go to university, study all the Freudian, all the jazz that we're studying, and then only be told that all of that is being
Yeah.
taken away, deleted, and there's new ideas that are built on over it, or not necessarily on top of it. And then there's a clinical way of doing things, which is, and the attempt is to take something which is intangible, which is the mind per se,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to capture it into boxes. And there are certain benefits to that, but clearly there are also disadvantages of doing that. And so yes,
Limitations. Yeah.
limitations to it as well. So yes, so could you explain some of those modalities and why those pathways that you've taken you seem are maybe slightly superior, if not?
So, I mean, in essence, we do not know where the mind begins and
Mm-hmm.
where it ends. We don't know where the body begins and where it ends. We don't know where, the soul begins, or whatever you want to call it, and where it ends. And so, this idea that, there is a mind, this is a conceptual, like it's a metaphor that we're using. And I'm saying this because it's important, first of all, to know, well, where, I've never seen, unless the person's dead, there's no line separating mind from body, right? There's no line separating emotions from thoughts. There's no line separating, these things are so intertwined that for me, it didn't make sense the way that they were categorized. You've got medicine and it's for the body, you've got meditation, or you've got these things and it's for the soul. And then you've got stuff to do with the mind, which is visualization, psychology, treatment of phobias, anxieties, etc. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, the way that you stand affects your mood, right? And you can change your mood by changing your posture. It's a quick fix. It's not a permanent fix, but it's definitely there. Music, just colors around you, being in nature. So it never made sense to segment everything the way that we may do in a non-holistic, traditional Western sense. The more Eastern approach made sense to me. And so hence why I started to study energy, hence why I started to study the somatic links between mind and body, because they did there are actual the treatments to trauma. They don't eradicate trauma as such, but they do help. That are somatic, whether it's dance, whether it's movement, There are whole modalities that deal just with that, and they do release suppressed tension. They don't get rid of the trauma, because I define trauma very differently than other people do. And you have to keep doing them in order to keep seeing results. So it's more of a coping and managing mechanism than it is a healing or a therapeutic approach.
Right.
But therapy in and of itself, I really don't believe is even geared towards working with trauma. So I was just meeting a doctor today who went through trauma, and he was talking about how, he was going through therapy and it helped him. And I said, what do you mean by help? He said, well, I understand what's going on, and when I'm triggered, I can either stop, or after I've done it, I can look back and analyze. I said, yeah, but that's coping and managing. That's not, you shouldn't be triggered in the first place. So in my experience, and this is my experience working with thousands of survivors of trauma and abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, sexual, or combination, or all of the above, therapy is not really geared towards working with trauma. And 35% of the people I work with are therapists themselves, EMDR specialists, counselors, psychiatrists, psychoanalysts, EMDR specialists, CBT specialists, the whole hypnotherapists. I can't tell you how many hypnotherapists I've worked with. So this whole idea that, it's in the body, it's not true. I've worked with people that do yoga. If it was in the body, they would have stretched it all off. It's in the mind. Well, I've worked with hypnotherapists. So if it's in the subconscious, they can hypnotize themselves all day, every day using self-hypnosis, and they should have solved their issue. But 20 years on, it's still there. So we need to really reconfigure our understanding of trauma, and hence why. And there's even, trauma is used very loosely. There's a traumatic event, and then there's trauma as in traumatized. Now, someone might go through a traumatic event and not be traumatized, whereas another person might be traumatized without even going through a traumatic event, based upon how they perceive the event to have been. For them, it may have been traumatic, but in actual fact, according to the median or the standard, it's not traumatic. So these are all things that are used very loosely. You get simple trauma, you get complex trauma. What does that actually mean? Where's the line between simple and complex? Yeah. So I don't find it very useful the way that things have been set up right now. It's not very pragmatic. It's not results oriented. It's not outcome oriented. It is more theory based. And, we think this, and so therefore, if we do that, we should get a result. That's a hypothesis, and the hypothesis has turned into fact, whereas it's never been proven or validated or verified as fact. So maybe I'm talking very, very out of the box right now, and you'll have to forgive me.
I was going to say there'll be a lot of clinicians out there who've dedicated their lives in a certain pathway.
Sure.
And
which I respect,
yes.
And it's not to, I've met many people, I've worked with many people, many of them are clinicians.
Right.
And the current understanding of therapy has stopped many people from committing suicide. Yeah, that ability to cope and manage and become highly functioning, even if you do keep your trauma, is not to be undermined. I'm not undermining it.
Right.
What I'm saying to you is that is not the eradication of trauma. I mean, when I do outreach on Facebook, I can't tell you how many therapists and clinicians will tell me this is ridiculous. You can't get rid of trauma. Right? I mean, the irony is that they are admitting defeat.
Right.
But they're projecting that on me by saying, this can't be possible. But it is possible. I mean, the results speak for themselves.
So that's very interesting. So firstly, you've mentioned that in terms of what our understanding of trauma in terms of from the clinical side, and as well as from how we perceive it from the layperson side, they're not necessarily matching. And then what you're also saying is that both or either could also are not necessarily capturing the realities of what trauma is. There may be usefulness to it. But something what you just said right now is that there's an idea or belief maybe in the clinical world that trauma cannot be taken away, whereas you are saying that no, that is possible. And that's,
I mean, anything anything that I mean, by definition, if you just think about it logically, anything that can be
Mm,
given can be taken away. Anything that can be made worse
mm,
should, if we're going to go forward, we should also be able to go back. The fact that we can move is what's important.
right.
So if I can make, just to give another analogy, if I can make someone's phobia worse, if I can actually make it worse, then that means I know the variables and the factors
Hmm.
that if I reversed would make it better, in theory,
In
right?
theory.
In theory. So, and the results speak for themselves as well. But this idea that it's a permanent destruction of
Mm,
something or a permanent rewiring. First of all, no one's ever opened someone's brain and found wires, right? Uh, uh, you know, and the other thing is there's a lot of evidence about plasticity and just learning and recreating of cells and neurons and everything else. It's a projection of defeat. It's a denial of defeat.
mm. So, and another thing you've just kind of hinted on is language. Um,
Yes,
and I think at the end of the day, what in order to make things the intangible tangible, ultimately we have to express it, and it comes in
sure.
the form of the complete form is language. You can make an art, you can make a dance, you can sing a song, but ultimately, or music
Mm.
rather, language is the thing that we're using in order to capture whatever internal experiences, external experiences that we're having. And obviously within the therapy world, there's things generally called talk therapy, CBT, and so on and so forth. And they have their certain ways of using language or to confront or even manage their patient. Could you speak more about that and how you look at language, and maybe even speak more about something you mentioned earlier as well, neurolinguistic programming? What are those things? How do you perceive language? How do you then use the language in order to help individuals or that come to you?
So I've kind of grown. The work that I do now has grown beyond that.
Mm,
So language is more of a tool as opposed to the enveloping structure that I use. If you permit me, I would like to first give you my definition of trauma,
yes, please.
because then that will allow you to see how things are different from a more, the shift of paradigm. So what I began to notice is that people who are traumatized, okay, not just that they've gone through trauma, but they still, that trauma is within them and the effect of it is still there.
Hmm.
So they're traumatized, just to be a little bit more specific. What I noticed is that they would experience opposites that should be mutually exclusive. So, for example, I would come across people who loved their parents but hated their parents at the same time. Now, love and hate are mutually exclusive, at least logically, but
Hmm.
emotionally, they were doing both of those things at the same time. They would trust and distrust the same person or themselves at the same time,
Hmm.
or in a very, very short time proximity. Or they would want to live and want to die at the same time.
Right.
Or they'd want to kill someone and want to save them and nurture them at the same time.
Hmm.
Or they'd want to be in complete control, but at the same time, create complete chaos at the same time. And what I began noticing is that these, and I call them polarities because you get two opposites happening at the same time. So one of those opposites is a polarity. And sometimes the polarities aren't the obvious ones, like I want to live, I want to die. It could be I want to live, I want to hate. That could be a polarity. They're set up emotionally or neurologically, not logically. So
Mm.
that's a little kind of beyond the scope maybe of what we're talking about, but just for anyone whom that might help a little bit, just throwing that there out there. So my definition of trauma is that it's people who have these opposites, and the average trauma survivor who is still traumatized has between 300 and 400 of these opposites all happening at the same time. I call that the trauma matrix because they meet. So, wanting to trust, wanting to distrust, that meets itself, but it also meets wanting control and wanting chaos. So if you want control, but you also distrust someone, that's going to create symptoms. Okay.
Hmm.
because you're trying to control, but you're also distrusting. So that's going to create symptoms such as possessiveness, jealousy. Okay. Now I call them symptoms, whereas therapy calls them problems or issues. Because for me, trauma is that structure that creates these symptoms. Whereas for them, trauma is the collection of these symptoms and the collection of these problems, right? It's seen differently. So, for example, if you want control and you want chaos at the same time, you will procrastinate, right?
Right.
Because you want to control, so you think about something again and again and again, but you're creating chaos by not doing anything. So procrastination is a perfect solution to wanting control and wanting chaos.
Mm.
I would deal with that by getting rid of this polarity, whereas therapy would deal with that by looking into the problem of procrastination.
Right.
I see procrastination as a symptom, they see it as the root.
Right.
Now, the problem with trauma is you can work on procrastination as a problem, but it will come back later. So you can work on self-loathing and I love me, I hate me. That's a polarity. If I can get rid of that polarity so that they're not doing it at the same time, they no longer have suicidal feelings. Whereas if we just work on the suicidal feelings, we can get rid of them temporarily, but it will come back because the structure that's creating them is still intact. So for me, trauma is the existence of that trauma matrix,
Hmm.
right? Whereas in therapy, loosely speaking, depending upon the modalities, trauma is, this person has so many issues, they must be traumatized, right? It's, because you can't really define, I mean, when you look, what is trauma? When you look at the therapeutic approach,
Hmm.
there's kind of two definitions. They define it by what causes it. Okay, so for example, looking here, trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, crime, or natural disaster. But a phobia could be the same as that. Anxiety could be the same as that. Depression could be, so it's not inclusive of what its factors are, and it's not exclusive of what it's not. It's
Right.
just a very, very loose thing. That's not really a definition, therefore. That's what caused the thing. But what is the thing? Then there's another definition, which is, well, trauma then means that you can or can't, that this happens or that. But again, what is the thing? So
Hmm.
one is talking about the cause, and one is talking about the effect. But what is the actual thing itself? Like, what is trauma? That hasn't been defined.
Right.
Whereas I define it as that matrix of opposite polarities. Now, how's a polarity created? Because that's the next, the next, line or question in line. Let's take the example of sexual abuse. So with sexual abuse, there are elements of love. Okay, in this context, they're not love; they're twisted, but they are innately love. So there's compliments, the physical, the biological pleasure that comes from physical touch,
Hmm.
the compliments, gifts, being singled out, the attention. All of these are innately loving things. In this context, no, but they are innately in and of themselves loving things. At the same time, there's the shame, there's the threats, there's being abandoned after being used. All of that is hateful. So you've got the love and the hate happening at the same time. And so it becomes one thing. These two things become one thing. And that's how the polarity is created. And so now that the person has that polarity, if ever they experience love, they expect it to come with hate because it always had. And that's why intimacy becomes a problem. Because if you show them love, they have to then expect hate.
Mm.
And if it doesn't come with it, they'll create it. They'll doubt you. They'll think you're trying to use them. They'll just have hateful feelings because it has to. These two things are now one. One cannot exist without the other. And if you show them hate, ironically, they will have to create love. And so you could be very, very hateful to someone who's traumatized, and they will make up excuse after excuse after excuse for you,
Hmm.
right? Whereas if you show them love, they will actually start doubting your love. They will create the hate because both have to exist at the same time. And obviously, you can't give them love and hate at the same time. So that is an issue. We can't deal with that by getting them to iterate, I love myself, I love myself, I love myself. That's not going to do it because with love comes hate and with hate comes love. We have to first discharge these two opposites from each other, separate them from each other. And now that we've separated them, they know what love is, they know what hate is. So I can't tell you how many survivors of trauma will tell me love and hate feel the same. I mean, if
Mm,
love feels the same as hate, how do you know whether you love someone or hate them? And how do you know whether they love you or hate you? And so the correlation between the attraction of narcissists with trauma survivors is through the roof. It's through
mm,
the roof because they have no idea, right?
right.
He hates me, therefore there's love there. He loves me, therefore there's hate there. It's like, it's kind of comic, but at the same time, it's tragic.
Wow. Uh, I, just listening to that, Adam, one thing you said earlier was that, you know, an individual can have what, 300 polarities within them?
300 or 400, that's average. Sometimes 600, 700.
Just thinking about that, and what it, how I perceived that was that there's these, they're living with these many levels or many different types of paradoxes, and going in
Yes,
between, just thinking about it is tiring. Uh
and many survivors of trauma suffer from chronic fatigue.
and God, and you can all understand why any individual who has these polarities come almost not just confused and
Yeah,
tired, it's just almost submitted and defeated to it, and so easy to then therefore what you were saying earlier about the language of defeat, and just you can
mm.
only, trauma is what it is and you just have to live with it. It's such an easy way to fall into that, simply because the complexity of it all.
And bear
uh
in mind as well, the phenomenon of the wounded healer,
mm,
right? So lots of therapists, the reality is they study psychology and they go into the whole field in order to uncover answers for themselves.
right.
And it doesn't work, but they're already on that track and they might as well make money from it and save other people's lives. And maybe possibly if they can figure out how to help other people, then they'll figure out how to help themselves in the meanwhile. So this is, again, not to undermine or to demean anyone's journey. I'm not saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, therapy saves lives. Okay, that coping and managing saves lives. At least having, like, without helping anyone, giving them any story or ideology upon which to pin their problem
Right.
does create a sense of relief. It's like, okay, well, now at least I understand. So, when I explain this to people without working with them, without actually getting rid of any of the polarities, just explaining to them creates a sense of relief. I can't tell you how many people just cry with relief. They
Right.
still have their issue, but it's like, I'm not crazy anymore.
Right.
I know what's happening.
Right. There's a validation of what they're experiencing, and that in and of itself, knowing that something is within me, and it's not, and it's this differentiation between the thing and me, and it's not one.
Right.
uh
Which is
so
very important.
and what you just said also kind of reminds me of some of the, I'm actually, so one of the classes I take is for pharma, psychopharmacology, and my instructor there, he, interesting character, he's head of a forensic mental health unit, often, who those, and he's an expert in substance use counseling, uh and he has cynical, cynical, I say cynical, way of looking at things as well, because labeling and trying to put people in boxes here in America specifically, and I'm sure everywhere else and many other places, it's a game of insurance, and being able to kind of
Right.
label something, and it kind of was where the money gets linked to, um because you codify, you quantify, it just helps with the business side of
Yeah, the
things.
box ticking. Yeah, yeah.
But as you were saying, I think many more therapists and counselors are now using this idea that knowing that individuals live with these paradoxes as they've created, and it's not just about dealing with what they're saying, what's the story behind the story. Moreover, it's a story, can it be rewritten, changed, deleted? um and
So it's not. So here's the thing. It's not so much a story, but it's a structure.
right.
So once we eradicate the structure,
Hmm.
all of the symptoms and all of the the boxes that housed the symptoms are no longer there. And so the symptoms go, but also the mechanism that was creating the symptoms is gone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a case of affirmations or belief change work or anything like that. They don't even need to know how this works.
Mm.
They don't know how trauma works. I mean, no one's explained beforehand. No one gives you a textbook saying, I'm going to do this, that to you. And it's going to result in you living in this way for the rest of your life. No one does that. So this idea that you need to explain to people and have them consciously aware in order for them to change is a fallacy, because they wouldn't, otherwise lay people couldn't traumatize. I mean, it's such a huge result. Traumatizing someone is an achievement, really, if you think about it. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a negative achievement. I know that comes with positive connotations usually when we say achievement, but it is a result. There's a huge change that happens in someone's life once they're traumatized, and a lay person can do that. Now, the lay person themselves doesn't even know how the brain works, might not even know the result and the ramification and the consequences and the torture, the hell that they're about to put someone through for the next 50, 60, 70 years. They have no idea. To them, they're just, touching or pushing or shaming or whatever it is that they're doing. So the practitioner of trauma doesn't even need to know what they're doing in order for it to be an effective trauma. And the person being traumatized definitely doesn't know what's going on at the age of 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7, or 12. So this whole idea that somehow conscious understanding needs to be brought into change is just a fallacy. It's just a fallacy. It's happened. The fact that they're traumatized means that they have changed, because they weren't traumatized before that, were they? Then the thing happened and now they're traumatized. So that happened without any conscious understanding. That change happened without any conscious understanding. To then stipulate that to step backwards, you have to have conscious understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't make sense.
Maybe use a working example. So if there's say a case study, if someone was to walk into your office or clinic,
Mm-hmm.
what would they typically come with? And then how would you then step by step take them through that journey of
Sure.
where they started
So,
and then ending with no trauma, as it were?
okay. So they come into the virtual metaphoric office, and they will have,
So
you know,
2022 of you.
post-COVID. So they will have, trauma effects. So there are 5 milestones of liberation. Okay, 5 milestones that are coined to allow people to know that they're going in the right direction. How do you know you're moving in the right direction? Just like when you're on the highway or the motorway, if you're seeing the signs, you know that you're going south, you're going north, you're going east, west. You're going towards where it is that you're hoping to head. So those 5 milestones are as follows: the expansion of the comfort zone. Okay, are they feeling more and more comfortable in more and more scenarios?
Mhm.
Okay, because you asked me how, but first of all, before we get to how, where is it that we're going, right? We need to know
Right.
where is it that we're going. So number one, they're more and more comfortable, that expansion of the comfort zone. Number two, there's a unified feeling. They feel integrated, they feel whole, as opposed to separated and that parts of them are fighting each other. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that internal war ends. Number three, their ability to separate the past from the present. Okay, you mentioned about how people run their relationships based upon their parents, modeling their parents, or trying to actually resist their parents as well, which kind of leads to the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
That means that they are the past is sabotaging the present and the future. So we need to separate the past from the present so that they can deal with the past as it presents itself. Sorry, the
Mm-hmm.
present as it presents itself. The past is outside the window. They can learn from it, but they're not superimposing it on everything as they proceed.
Right.
Number four is then their ability to be sure of themselves. Because you can imagine if you're having 300 or 400 opposite feelings at the same time, that's going to create a lot of self-doubt. Well, what do
Mm-hmm.
I feel? Do I feel this way or do I feel that way?
Mm-hmm.
And then number 5 is the ability for them then to flourish, to ascend in life.
Right.
Okay, so that's where we're going. So what's the opposite of that? The opposite of that is that people are uncomfortable, they're anxious,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're hypervigilant.
Mm-hmm.
The opposite of being unified and integrated is that there's this internal war and there's lots of pieces and they don't know which one to listen to.
Right.
The opposite of separating the past from the present is having the past hounding you and being triggered with flashbacks and emotional triggers.
Mm-hmm.
The opposite of that self-trust and that sureness is self-doubt, second guessing yourself, which is and you know, tangent to that, something like CBT, where you're asking someone to analyze their own thoughts, that's just more self-doubt.
Mm.
That's more second guessing. And sometimes, I can't tell you how many times people come to me and say, I feel like I'm falling apart and I feel so much more confused and CBT has made me more anxious. It's because they're already second guessing themselves. And CBT is the process of really doing more of that. You know, you're analyzing your own thoughts. And what's the opposite of ascending and flourishing is surviving. Okay. So that then affects elements of your life. It affects your relationships, it affects your health, it affects how you perceive time, and it affects your ability to earn wealth and to keep it. Those 4 quadrants, right? Which is something I took from coaching, just as a way to categorize elements of your life. You know, there's nothing special about it. It's just a way to categorize.
Mm.
So if you are constantly hypervigilant and scared and uncomfortable, how's that going to affect your relationships? How's that going to affect your health? How's that going to affect your perception of time? People wake up in the morning wishing they had it. Okay, how's that going to affect your wealth? Shopping therapy, self-medication, you know, not being able to stay in a job because they get overwhelmed too easily. All of this just from that first milestone,
Mm.
okay, of being uncomfortable. Now, popular psychology will tell you you need to step outside of your comfort zone in order to grow. But traumatized people are by definition uncomfortable. So if we're going to get them to step even further outside of the comfort zone, that's not the right direction, which is why I created these milestones. The milestone is expand your comfort zone. That's the right direction.
Just to something to relate to, that people may be familiar with. Is this something close to motivational interviewing, where they say roll with the resistance element?
That's a way of dealing with it. That's a way of dealing with it. But when you have 300 or 400 things that you're rolling with, you're literally like, you know, remember those cartoons where you're like, you know, you got 500 people punching you and all you see is like a cloud of fists. That's what it
Right,
feels like. That
right.
that 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 mindfulness approach, when you have
Hmm.
polarities, it feels like you're just condoning being abused by 300 or 400 different emotions and thoughts and self-doubt and whatnot.
Okay.
And
So
if you take the second milestone, you know, that inner war again, how's that going to affect your relationships? Who wants to be with someone who's literally internally warring with themselves? How can you show love when you on the inside feel like you're falling apart? So these 5 milestones affect these 4 quadrants of your life. And when
right.
someone comes to me, I'm listening. I, through language, I can hear what their polarities are. Through what they're saying, I know what must be there in terms of polarities. I do this very intuitively. I haven't figured out how to teach this yet,
Hmm.
but it's something where I can hear what they're saying, and then I know, okay, this person wants control and hate, or control and love at the same time.
Can you give us
And
an
so therefore,
example of that?
we discharge. Um,
Not to
this
put
is
you on the
very.
spot.
It's not a spot thing. The way I do it is that someone says something and then I pick up on it, as opposed to I kind of project it. But so it's a bit of a different skill set. But let's say, for example, yeah. So I was speaking to a lady 2 days ago. Um, I've spoken to thousands. I mean, I've worked with thousands of people, and this lady was one of the most overbearing in terms of her questions and her emails and her expectation that I respond within like an hour. Uh, I never set those expectations. I don't know where they came from, and I never had someone like this uh,
Mm,
from thousands of people that I've worked with. So what she's doing is that she there's a combination of polarities. One of them is I want to succeed, I want to fail. Yeah, she wants everything to be perfect. You know, so I've had 6 calls with her, and she's still asking me, "Are you going to send me the Zoom link, or are we
mm,
going to have a call?" And it's like 6 times in a row now we've had the Zoom link. So, but there's this: I want success and I want failure. She's so afraid of it being wrong, and she's so demanding of success that it's just overbearing. It's like over the top. That's one polarity that comes with it. Another polarity is that she will expect very high standards
mm-hmm.
of herself and from others, but at the same time, she expects very low standards. Because if she didn't expect low standards from me, she wouldn't be asking me. I mean, it's such a simple thing. I'm going to send you a link, as I have all of the last 6 weeks. Yeah, such a simple thing. But because
Right,
she expects in her mind for it to go wrong, she then tries to balance that off by wanting it to go 100% right, 1,000% right.
right.
So there's, things are going to go wrong, things are going to go good. I expect failure, I expect success. So just from what she was, and then there was success and being a good person. Success, I love me,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I'm successful, I love me. If I'm a failure, I hate me. Again, another polarity. And that's one a lot of people have. But I define trauma as when you have many of these polarities. So yeah, people might, notice 1 or 2 polarities in themselves, 7, 8, 9, that's fine. But that's a big, big polarity where literally, if I didn't get back to her within 3 hours, she was having a hissy fit. She was melting down. It was like an existential problem.
Wow.
Do you understand? It was an
Mm-hmm.
existential problem. So that's an example of 2 or 3 polarities that are there based upon the presenting symptoms and what she's saying to me. That's kind of how I figure out. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Well, that I think that makes sense. As you were mentioning and talking us through the example, a thought that came to my mind was that if this is not addressed, to say the least,
Yeah,
and an individual then does go into relationships, whatever that relationship is, the one that now is receiving that, the burden on that, because obviously I'm in the position, for example, I'm trying to form an intimate relationship, trying to find a life partner, and I have actually worked with you before to deal with some of my issues, as it were, and that obviously opened up this idea that there's a lot of work an individual has to do. But then as I speak to individuals and I see how I recognize some of the things that they're doing, it becomes this interesting dance, and obviously the decisions have to be made whether you want to stay with them or you don't, right? Could you speak on that element, on what happens, how the experience of the one receiving all of that?
no, yeah,
Um,
yeah. So I created this term called narcissist creation protocol. Okay, NCP.
right.
So let me give you. I don't have any of my props, any of my toy horses, that my son's toy horses, but you're going to have to just imagine it with me. So imagine now the scenario where I'm trying to train a horse to jump.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I get on the horse and he's already been trained a little bit. So the horse runs, and then we get to the jump, and he does a perfect jump, and we land. And the
Right.
horse looks at me and says, "Right, what do you think? That was a good jump, right?" So the horse is showing me love, and he's
Mm-hmm.
expecting me to give him love back. But because I have this love hate thing going on, because he's showing me love, I have to show him hate. So I slap the horse, okay? Because I feel like, you know, I just don't, I feel like it comes with hate, and so I have to create it. So the horse is thinking, I thought that was a good jump. I mean, based upon all my previous trainers, that was a good jump. Maybe I didn't try hard enough. Okay, so the horse goes round again, and we're running, running, running. We get there and we jump, and it's even better than the last time. The horse lands and he looks at me and says, "Come on, that was amazing, right?" And I hit him just as hard or harder. The horse is really confused. This happens 3 or 4 times. Now, guess what's going to happen? The horse doesn't want to run anymore. It doesn't want to run towards the jump. So I hit him to get him to run. Okay, so now the horse is escaping pain by running. But he knows that the second he gets to the jump and he makes it, he's going to experience even more pain. So the horse is like, if I show you love, you punish me. And if I show you hate by not running in the first place, you punish me. So now guess what the horse is going to do? The horse is going to run, 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 run. The second he gets to the jump, he's going to put his head down and you're going to go flying on top over the thing, right? The horse doesn't want to jump because he's going to get beat. And he doesn't want to stay still because he's going to get beat. Okay. Now take that as a metaphor, and now let's make the analogy to it. You're in a relationship with someone, and she loves you, and she goes out of her way to buy you a beautiful gift.
Right.
And she gives you that gift, you don't feel comfortable. You feel like it comes with strings attached, there's a catch, something not quite right about it, so you reject the gift. You know, someone who's, when you've gone to all that effort and someone rejects your gift, that's like being slapped. That's the horse being slapped. It feels bad. That's pain, not pleasure, that rejection. So you walk away, you're like, maybe the gift wasn't good enough. This time I'll spend 3 months buying the gift as opposed to 1, and I'll really think about it. It's the thought that counts and all of that rubbish, okay? So you go away, you come back with an amazing gift, she rejects you again. Another slap. This happens 3 or 4 times. Now you no longer want to get her a gift. You wish you could, but you don't want to be slapped, or you don't want to be rejected. Okay, maybe she fights with you. I told you not to get me gift. But now she's thinking, how come he doesn't get me gifts anymore? Does he not love me?
Right.
She's not going to say that to you. And if she does say that to you, say, well, last time I got you a gift, you slapped me. But this isn't a logical, conscious conversation. She or he, they're reacting on a neurological level. So now they slap you, you don't get me gifts anymore. Jump. Do you understand?
Right.
So now you're put in this corner where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. But either way, you're damned. Right now, no one wants to be damned. So then what happens is the person's either going to leave, or ironically, if they love you, they'll want to stay. But in order to stay within that context of being damned either way, they now have to become aggressive. They have to become narcissist in terms of my way or the highway, because they can't please you anyway. Do you understand? So I'm going to the restaurant, you're coming or not, right? I'm getting you this gift. You like it, you don't like it, throw it away. So do you understand? They change.
Right. They start to impose.
Condoning.
Right.
They start what?
They start to impose and their way, and because you're not in control, you don't know what you want. Therefore,
you don't know what you want.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm not going to put myself. So you like it, you like it. You don't. And it becomes the traumatized person is creating these narcissistic characteristics. Now they split up after a while, and that narcissist goes to another person, and they're not like that anymore. Yeah, because the context has changed. They're no longer damned if they do, damned if they don't.
Right.
They're being cornered into a polarity, and the only way to protect themselves from that polarity is just to go all out warfare.
Good God, that's a whole fascinating and another podcast episode about the narcissist.
And that's not to say that everyone that ends up with a narcissist created that narcissist. I'm not saying that. Yeah.
Right.
There is a correlation between trauma survivors attracting narcissists who are always narcissists. And they're usually trauma survivors as well, by the way. But that's not the point. And the reason why they attract them is because it's the love-hate thing. He's showing me, hey, there must be love there as well. There's love underneath that veneer of cruelty. I will be the one to fix her. I will be the one to fix him. I'll be
Hmm.
the one to fix the bad boy, or to finally melt the ice queen. They want the love that comes with the hate.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
That makes absolute sense, and it's interesting because I've heard some conversations about narcissism and identifying the narcissist, and if you, and whether or not you're living with a narcissist. Often the conversation doesn't speak about the environment that produces the narcissist, and it's
And
and
this whole thing of getting lay people, and I don't mean that in a superior inferior kind of dynamic, but this idea now of, if you don't do what I want, you're a narcissist. All right. If you decide to go out with your friends instead of, help me clean the room for the seventh time today, then you're a narcissist. That's another topic completely outside of the scope of this, but I
Mhm,
just want to throw that in there because it's wanting control and wanting chaos.
mhm,
Like, can you see how, like, so many things come into it? It's wanting to succeed, wanting to fail. It's wanting
right,
to be loved and wanting to be hated at the same time. There's so many things that come into it.
right. And then just from my little experience of trying to develop an intimate relationship, it's often I have found people like they've got this guard up, and it's like like half of my job, or more than half of my job, is to get you to put them, get the guards to put down, so that I can actually recognize who you really are, and
Mhm.
I'm fighting against the history of this person that they had,
Now,
and
half of that
mhm,
is a defense mechanism.
right,
But the other half of it can sometimes be, if you truly loved me, you would swim through as much crap as I give you,
right,
and that would prove your love for me. So I'm giving you hate, and you got to balance off with love.
mhm,
Now, if that were true, and all I had to do was swim through your crap once and pass the test, maybe I could maybe work with that.
mhm,
But if this is going to be an everlasting dynamic where you're expecting me to swim through a new river of muck every day, or 5 times a day, or 20 times a day, that's when there's the polarity now.
right. As in, there's a I could go into and speak to the moon becomes blue about the the other manifestations that we see in society, and the history behind all of those like commitment issues and Gen Z, millennials, and all that jazz that popular conversations are about. But what I think I really want to focus as we try to come towards the end of the show is, firstly, how does an individual recognize within themselves that they should come speak to an individual like yourself? Because I bet, and you know this more than I do, a lot of people may live in certain type of denial, or that they have an issue, or they don't want to recognize there's an issue, just like, or they're just scared of the whole idea of seeing a therapist or trauma therapist.
I mean, the fear of seeing a therapist is real, and you know, one of the things I'm completely against is this idea of reliving trauma,
Mm,
having to go past to an age, whether it's hypnotic regression or whether it's just CBT or counseling. You kind of stand there naked, bare yourself to ultimately a stranger who you don't know,
mm-hmm,
and tell them about what happened to you and what didn't happen to you, what should have happened to you and what could have happened to you but never, and all the shoulda, woulda, coulda. The issue with that is that it is re-traumatizing. It is. I mean, if I get you right now to imagine your mother crossing the road and a truck hitting her, if you were to actually imagine that, you would feel pain. Okay, and that has never happened because your
mm,
mother's still alive. I know this about your mother, right? So imagine now that that did happen to your mother,
mm,
and I got you to imagine it again and again and again. So it hurts even though it didn't happen. Imagine how much more it would hurt now that it has happened, or if it had happened. So going back and reliving trauma, the way that many modalities actually believe is like is a obligatory component of healing, actually makes it worse.
mm,
Because this idea of separating past from present, if you're reliving it again and again, now how are you separating past from present?
mm-hmm,
Yeah. It's the opposite direction in terms of the milestones, complete opposite direction.
Right.
So, uh, I empathize and I actually agree with them. If you don't feel comfortable doing therapy where you're going to have to revisit your trauma, then don't, right? And even if you feel comfortable about it, I would also strongly recommend that you see someone who isn't asking you to relive your trauma, because it re-triggers and it condones the structures. It makes them worse, not better. That's the first thing. In terms of like how will they know? How will they not know? If someone listening to this and it relates to them, they will know. If someone isn't listening to them, it's pointless to give an answer. Like it's pointless to give an answer.
Right.
But not only is it pointless, it's actually very difficult. It has to resonate. When someone calls me up on behalf of their son or daughter or partner, there's not much I can do because it hasn't resonated. And then also, you may think they're traumatized, but that's the whole layman, approach to just putting someone in a box, pigeonholing them, and that's it. Trauma is the new schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is the tag that you used to get when psychologists didn't know what to do with you. We don't know what to do with this guy. We don't know what's wrong with him. He's a schizophrenic. Now, we know a lot of their issues and their problems, but we can't really get rid of them. Therefore, he's traumatized.
Right.
It's that label that you're given when they just want to put their hands up and say, we tried, we're still trying, and but this is your label. At least you get yourself a label. Here's your certified label. Take that to the bank. So, yeah, if someone resonates with this, then most likely they've gone through some form of trauma. And it doesn't have to be a shameful thing, and a lot of the people that actually get untraumatized are very happy to share their videos and their gains. And the reason for that is it's no longer a problem. There's nothing left for them to be ashamed of. It doesn't represent them. That there's that separation in terms of identity. Trauma is an identity for lots of people. I am a survivor, right? I am a warrior. Well, if trauma becomes, and many people ask me, yeah, but what will I do without the trauma? It's comic, but it's again tragic,
Right.
because it's like there's so much out there that is not trauma that you could be and do. And I mean, if whatever you've achieved with 300 or 400 apps running in the background, imagine what you can achieve when there are no apps running in the background. And your mobile phone is completely and utterly just this one app that is focused on, and all the processors doing just that.
You very interestingly, as you've mentioned before, you've had as your clients therapists themselves, right? Could you shed a light on why a therapist will go to you specifically? And they've been through the whole traditional route.
Right. And that's why, I mean, you've just answered it. Because they've been through the traditional route, because they've had 20 years of different types of modalities and nothing is working. Yeah. They know, and they can see it with their own clients as well. I have videos of testimony for this. They're helping them cope, they're helping them manage, but they wish they could save them. But then there comes this imposter syndrome as well. Like, there's no way out. Like, I can't even help myself, and I'm not really helping them. I'm just helping them cope and manage.
Right.
That comes with a lot of guilt and a lot of, it's problematic for sure, right? It's problematic. So 15, 20 years, I think they just get to a point where I can't do this anymore. And I don't really care how it works, so long as it works. Because all these other things that supposedly should have worked, that I knew how they should have worked, didn't. So I don't care anymore. I just want the result. That's where they get to usually. But when I do work with a therapist, I always have the verbal contract beforehand. I make it very clear. I don't explain things as we go along, and I'm not going to entertain that either. This isn't going to be push and pull. We're not going to have debates or like academic adventures. We're not going to do that. You come, I discharge your polarities, and that's it. I'm sorry, if you want more than that, but that's not the process of untraumatizing. I'm
Right.
here to untraumatize you, liberate you of your trauma, and that's it, we're done. I usually do that within 6 weeks. After which, you'd be surprised. People don't really care. They don't really care. Because here's the thing, right? If you're not going to have a problem anymore, why would you want to understand it?
Right. As in, from a clinical point of view as well, my objective as a medical student, as also a substance use counselor in training, is I want my patient to be happy and healthy. Actually, one of my instructors just said that I don't uh, believe the AA, for example, the Alcoholic Anonymous has anything worthwhile in it. However, if my client comes to me and says it works for me, go for it. Just to
I
give
mean,
us is
whether it's placebo
right,
or whether it's just that community not wanting to let other people down,
right.
because that's another thing from trauma is me and you.
Mm,
Okay, they don't actually know how to separate me from you. Me and you is together. Because remember, they were coerced to do things for others and made to feel that if they did that, that made them better. And if they didn't do that, they would be given guilt trips or shame or threats or whatever else. And so this separation between me and other doesn't exist. That's a polarity as well. Okay, which is
right,
why you could teach them boundaries till you're blue in the face. But in order to know, underpinning boundaries and presupposing boundaries is there is me and there is you.
right.
If there isn't me and you and it's just blah, then what boundaries?
Mm,
Boundaries mean that they're one country or another. I mean, how can you have boundaries within a country? Do you understand? So
right.
you need to separate that first. So yeah, it's there are lots of things that help people to cope and manage.
Hmm.
AA has stopped people from suicide.
Right.
Hats off. We have to admit that. But uh, if you're in AA for 40 years and you fear that leaving AA tomorrow will mean that you're going to go back to drinking, then it's arguable that you haven't actually healed. You know, you're not drinking, you're sober, you're achieving the outcome, but it's this endless coping and managing, right?
Right.
I can't tell you how many people suddenly just stopped smoking marijuana, or just stopped getting drunk, or just stopped overeating, or just stopped self-harming, or cutting themselves, or
Hmm.
whatever else. They dealt with those things as if they were problems, but remember, they're not problems, they're symptoms.
Right.
So once we get rid of the actual polarities and that trauma matrix, the symptom doesn't arise anymore. I never dealt with that. There are people who later told me I stopped this or I stopped that. I didn't know they were doing that, and I didn't need to know either. I really don't care what the symptoms are. All I
Hmm.
care about is the like. Look, imagine right now that you're in charge of making sure that the water is pure in
Hmm.
your village or in your city. Okay, if it's not pure, it can create lead cancer. It could, cancer from lead poisoning. It can create infertility problems. It can create all of these things. But you really don't care about that because you're not a medical doctor.
Hmm.
You know that it causes problems if it's impure, and those problems go away once the water's pure. That's it. So my job is not to know what the symptoms are. Yeah, I gave up doing that long ago. It was just a waste of time.
Hmm.
My job is to see the water and to purify it.
Right. So, Adam, how does one reach you? Where do they go? You've mentioned some of the elements of the programs that you have. Um, uh, yeah. So could you explain to us how anyone
Sure.
wanted to get some help?
Well, what I usually do is I run a workshop, usually every Sunday at 6 or 7 p.m. UK time, depending upon what's most convenient. Um, and people can register for that. Obviously, when they register, they know what time it will be. I don't just randomly throw the time up on the wall. Um, but the time does change, and I'll let you know beforehand before you register. www.tranquilandcherished.com is the homepage, and where you can also register if you are interested in joining one of those workshops. Within the workshop, I go deeper
Hmm.
into a lot of what we've discussed today. Uh, Inevitably, I do get asked by people how they can work with me and join the program, etc. And if I do, then I explain on the workshop, kind of in the after party, so to speak, about what the options are. And then anyone that wants to proceed, they can. There are different options based upon severity of trauma, based upon how much actual physical, hands-on, so to speak, help they want from me or interaction with me, and also based upon affordability and time, how quick they want the results. So yeah, that's all explained if need be on the workshops if people are interested in that. But it's www.tranquilandcherished.com, and they can register there.
Cool. Usually have this something I picked up from listening to other podcasts is have my guests answer 3 questions, but I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to let you. Is there anything else that you would want to share about this topic?
Yeah, with regards to trauma, it's so insidious and such an energy suck because you can understand 300 or 400 things are happening at the same time. It's going to create fatigue. It's going to create confusion. It's going to, fibromyalgia. I've never, ever, ever met someone who has fibromyalgia who didn't go through trauma. I have yet to meet someone who has fibromyalgia who did not go through trauma. So there are many symptoms. I mean, I have videos of people saying my hip pain has gone. Right? My hernia has gone, and she's had it for 20 years. Okay. It's so insidious that it creates these issues that you just couldn't explain. I mean, I can't tell you that trauma creates hip pain, but once someone's gone through a program and they no longer have hip pain, there was a correlation. I mean, it's pretty obvious, the cause and effect there. So it's more of a message of hope. Yeah, ME, unexplainable chronic pains. All of these things are part and parcel of the symptoms created by trauma.
Right.
And the good news is, almost all of that disappears. When even ADHD, I mean, if you've got 300 or 400 things that you're focusing on, someone on the outside might think you're lacking attention. But the reality is you're not. You're looking at 300 or 400 different things. You're focusing, but on 300 or 400 different things. That's not to say everyone with ADHD and trauma, ADHD is a misdiagnosis, but in many cases it is. Bipolar, personality disorders. Again, if someone's having to go from polarity to polarity to polarity, it's going to look like they've got multiple characteristics, multiple characters. That they've got a personality disorder. Again, many times it's a diagnosis. So yeah, I think that's it. Just by way of hope, just to let people know, there's a way out, and a lot of these symptoms are just symptoms; they're not problems.
That's a brilliant note to, I think, end on. Thank you so much, Adam. It's again
my absolute pleasure.
It's been great to speak to you, see you, albeit virtually, and hope to see you soon in the coming future. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and for sharing about ideas on trauma, relationships, and yeah, just a nice little hope that this can be dealt with and dealt with very well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for hosting me.
What an absolutely fascinating conversation that was. As I said, I've known him for a while, but every time I sit with Adam, it's I learn so much, and it's this is, and as he was saying a few things, I was reflecting on some of the things that I do, my behaviors, and made me reflect on my past, and how that can potentially contribute towards my journey in trying to find an intimate partner. But I think my little message for anyone who's taking the time to listen to this this episode is, number one, it is brave and to seek help and to know that going to a therapist can be useful, and it's not necessarily someone has to say I've or as we were discussing, label oneself as having a problem. It's simply sometimes asking, how can I be better, and how can I improve? And speaking to counselors and therapists like Adam Musa can be really, really interesting, because you have these outside perspective on your own behaviors, and can just allow us to see things in a very different way, and with a fresh pair of eyes. And it's but I think those of us who are have been thinking about our relationships, how to improve our relationships, how to be better partners, or just trying to form relationships and to do away relationship related issues, and they may think maybe because of traumatic experience in the past, or any other reason you may think, I think going to a therapist is important. I will be putting Adam Musa's website link, if you're watching on YouTube, in the description. If you're listening to on some other platform in a podcast form, it'll be in the description there as well. Please do subscribe to the Healthy Mind Chat YouTube channel, and wherever you're listening to the podcast, do subscribe to us. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for listening. And I hope to catch you in the next episode. Until then, take care of yourself, and don't forget to say I love you to those who you love.